The rain fell in long, straight lines across the lower terraces of Synralispire, turning the cracked tiles of the market into a sheet of glass that reflected neon light and shadows of hurried strangers. Marcus Valen stood under the thin protection of a bent awning, his coat already soaked through at the shoulders, watching as people pressed forward with their errands, eyes down, mouths tight, eager to pass unnoticed. He had just left the echo of another lecture, words about dead civilizations spoken into a half-filled hall of bored apprentices, and he carried the weight of silence, waiting at home with his daughters heavier than the fatigue in his chest. Nevin and Alira were clever, resourceful, even tender with each other, but he knew discipline could not fill the hollowness where warmth should have been. He knew the sound of laughter in their apartment had become too rare. That truth, knowing for months, had driven him to the market tonight, to the fringes where light bled weakly, and the smell of fried roots and rust mixed with rain. He saw her then pressed against a shuttered kiosk, as if willing herself invisible, her jaw hard, her golden eyes watching every passerby for threat or opportunity. Her blue skin glistened with water, undertones shifting faintly beneath the broken neon, and her braids clung dark and heavy to her shoulders. Her skirt was patched mesh, stiff with age, her wrap torn at the hem and pinned with wire. She stood barefoot on wet tile, refusing to beg but vibrating with tension, a creature accustomed to survival on the edges of other people's pity. Marcus stepped forward, carrying a warm container he had bought 2 stalls back, steam curling through its seal. He stopped near her, not so close as to crowd, not far enough to pretend indifference, and his voice carried calm but no pity. "Hungry?" She flicked her eyes at him, sharp and distrusting, her shoulders set as though braced for a blow. "What's inside?" she asked. He opened the seal, releasing the peppery scent of Von root soup and the dense comfort of Zirin bread. The smell rose into the rain like defiance. She studied him, not the food, his face, his stance, his hands. Marcus felt the evaluation, the calculation of a woman who had learned that every kindness hid a trap. He held out the bread. She reached, hesitant, then quick, fingers brushing his wrist just long enough for him to feel the practiced flick of a thief. His keyband was gone before he even glanced down. He didn't lunge, didn't scold, only said, "You won't put that back." Her mouth curved in something too flat to be humor. "Maybe I won't." He met her gaze without heat. "You will. It only opens one door. My daughters are behind it." The words landed heavier than threat, heavier even than rain. For a heartbeat, her golden eyes softened, then sharpened again. Without a word, she slid the band back into his palm. He closed his hand around it, nodding once. "You asked what I want. I'll tell you. I need a mother for my daughters. And you need shelter." The air between them thickened, the sentence absurd and absolute, like throwing a stone into deep water and waiting for ripples. She gave a short, dry laugh that held no mirth. "That's not how offers work. It's how mine does." At that moment, 2 market wardens turned the corner, gray ponchos slick with rain, scanning for loiterers. One slowed, his gaze fixed on Serena, not Marcus. "No standing around. Move." Marcus spooned broth into his own mouth, swallowed, and nodded. "We are eating." The warden's eyes lingered on Serena with the weight of suspicion, then dismissed them with a shrug and moved on. She exhaled, her body loosening slightly, but her eyes still sharp. "You didn't name a price," she said carefully. "I won't. You said mother, not helper." Risky word. Marcus didn't flinch. "It's the right word. And you think I'm right for it?" she asked. He said only, "You returned the band." She tore off a piece of bread then, chewing slow, eyes still locked on him as if waiting for his mask to slip. Finally she asked, "Your daughters how old?" 7, he said. Nevin, Elira. The change in her was slight, but real. Her expression sharpened at the sound of names, as though she'd been handed something she hadn't expected. She ate another piece, slower now, considering, then lowered the container. If I walk with you, what happens next? Marcus's voice stayed level. You meet them. You eat a proper meal. You decide if you stay. Her chin tilted, skeptical but curious. And if I don't? Then you walk away. Rain hissed against the market roof, the sound of the city closing in around them. Across the way, a boy clutched a cracked cup, shivering in the cold. Serena snapped off a piece of bread and passed it to him without looking at Marcus. He didn't stop her. That, more than his words, told her something. She wiped her wet palms on her skirt, lifted her chin, and said, I'll come up. I won't promise to stay. Marcus inclined his head. That's enough for today. And together they walked toward the lift. The space between them filled not by trust, but by the fragile possibility of it. The lift carried them in silence, its hum filling the space between their wary glances. And when the doors opened, Marcus led Serena down a quiet corridor lined with pale, buzzing lights until they stopped before a narrow apartment door that smelled faintly of lemon oil and rain-soaked paper, a contrast to the sharp-fried odors below. He keyed his band, and the lock clicked, revealing a room that was spare, but carefully ordered 2 shelves lined with worn lecture tablets, a rack with only 3 hooks used, drawings taped crookily to the wall, the faint smell of broth lingering from a pot still warm on the stove. Nevin appeared first, her socks mismatched, hair pulled into a braid that leaned heavily to one side, her eyes narrowing at the sight of Serena in the doorway, while Elira crept out behind her, clutching a one-eared rabbit doll, her gaze cautious, almost fearful, as though the presence of a stranger meant something fragile in their lives was about to shift. Marcus's tone remained steady, deliberate. We have a guest for dinner. The girls didn't move. Serena felt their eyes like knives and shields all at once. Nevin, boldest, asked flatly, Are you cold? Serena hesitated, then admitted, A little. Nevin disappeared to the rack, pulling free a black shirt that smelled faintly of soap, and gave it to her with a casual command. Wear this. It's clean. Elira whispered, almost too soft to hear, What's your name? Serena. Elira tested the word on her tongue, then nodded once, hiding behind the rabbit again. Serena's throat tightened at the unfamiliar weight of being addressed directly without contempt. Marcus gestured down the hall, explaining where the bathroom was. Filtered water in the panel, cloth in the white bin. She walked there slowly, closing the door behind her, leaning back against it to breathe. The small ceramic room reflected her image in fragments. She pressed her palms into the clear water, splashed her face until the cold steadied her, and stared at herself, the wire pinning her torn wrap, the damp braids heavy with rain. For a moment she almost left, certain this was a trap of civility that would snap when she relaxed. Yet when she put on the shirt, loose and warm from Nevin's hands, she felt the smallest shift, not comfort, but the edge of it. When she stepped out again, Marcus was laying bowls on the table, his motions precise and unhurried, his daughter seated with rigid anticipation. Serena lowered herself onto a chair, the scrape loud in the silence. Steam rose from the soup, thickened with Draxon mushroom and dried kelp, stretched to feed 4. Nevin tapped her spoon against her bowl, impatience plain, while Elira watched Serena with wide, silent eyes. Marcus ate first, calm, deliberate, showing them what he wanted them to see. Serena lifted her spoon, tasted, and devoured half the bowl before slowing, where both girls were staring. What is it? She asked. Nevin tilted her head. You eat like you're afraid it'll vanish. The words cut, but Serena answered quietly, "It usually does." Silence fell until Marcus set his spoon down and said firmly, "It won't hear." No one argued. After dinner, Nevin pulled a chipped box from under the table, opening it with a grin to reveal a thin gray shawl edged in gold thread. "We found it in a crate." "It's yours now." Serena froze, gift heavy as stone. A gift was acknowledgement. Dangerous. She wanted to refuse, but their expectant eyes pinned her. Slowly she took it, draping it over her shoulders, the fabric soft, clean, warm. "Thank you," she whispered, throat tight. Nevin beamed. Halira ducked her face into the rabbit's ear, hiding a smile. Marcus didn't smile, but relief showed in the set of his shoulders. Later, when the girls had gone to their room, Serena moved to help clear dishes, but Marcus's hand stopped hers. "Tomorrow you can," he said evenly. "Tonight you're a guest." She paused, then asked the question that had lingered since the market. "Why me?" "You could have chosen anyone." He stacked bowls slowly, deliberate as always. "I saw someone who wouldn't let a hungry child pass by." "That's enough." She waited for the demand, the trap. None came. She folded the shawl tighter, and for the first time in years wondered if belonging was not just a trick of hunger. Morning light seeped pale through the glass panels, streaked with turquoise from the ocean below, and gray from the heavy clouds above, casting a muted glow across Marcus's apartment as Serena emerged from the small room where she had slept lightly. The shawl folded neatly at the foot of the bed as if keeping things too close would draw suspicion. And she paused at the doorway, watching the rhythm of a household not yet hers, but already threatening to pull her into its current. Marcus standing at the counter, sleeves rolled, pouring coffee into mismatched mugs, his movements efficient and unhesitating. Alira doodling circles in the condensation on her cup, Nevin tugging impatiently at her braid with the scowl of a child who demands the world be less imperfect than it is. Serena hesitated, her bare feet cold against the tile, the black shirt still too large for her frame. And when Marcus glanced over and said simply, "There's a cup for you," sliding the chipped mug across, she felt a brief disorientation, as though the gesture meant more than warmth, more than bitter liquid. It meant acknowledgement, presence, a place at the table, so she sat and took it, hiding her reaction behind a cautious sip, forcing her throat not to flinch at the acrid taste. Alira peered at her shyly and asked, "Did you sleep?" Serena considered lying, then shook her head. "Not much? Too loud?" Alira pressed. "Too quiet," Serena admitted, and the girl nodded as if she understood something too complicated for adults, while Nevin plopped into her seat and asked without ceremony, "When are you leaving?" The words hit sharp, not cruel but testing, and Serena stiffened, glancing at Marcus, who answered evenly, "She stay until she chooses otherwise." The steadiness of his voice carried weight. It wasn't bargaining, it wasn't fragile, it was fact. And though Serena's chest tightened, she forced herself to say, "I don't know yet." That seemed to satisfy Nevin, who chewed on bread while watching her as if cataloging her flaws. After breakfast, Marcus gathered the girls for school, his voice shifting into the cadence of command, calm but unyielding. Shoes, bags. 7 minutes, and they obeyed with practiced speed. Alira tying her ribbon with precision, while Nevin nearly forgot hers. The dynamic of a family Serena could sense but not yet join, until Marcus caught her hesitation by the door and said, "Come with us. See where they go." So she walked beside them into the brightening corridor, aware of every pair of eyes that slid toward her, the bare legs beneath the borrowed shirt, the shawl folded across her shoulders. The whispers she had heard her whole life sharpened here into cold assessment, but when Alira slipped her small hand into Serena's without looking up, the fragile gesture pierced deeper than the whispers, steadying her enough to keep her chin high. At the school's glass facade, Nevin darted off to her friends while Alira squeezed Serena's hand once more, whispering, "See you later, Miss Serena," before running after her sister, leaving Serena frozen with the unexpected pang of being named. Neither scorn nor pity, but a distance she could live with. And when she turned, Marcus was watching, posture steady, expression unreadable, telling her, "They'll test you. Don't take it as rejection." She met his gaze sharply. "And you? Do you test me too?" His answer came without hesitation. "I already made my choice." The blunt certainty unsettled her more than cruelty would have. And in that moment, she understood that if she stayed, the challenge wouldn't be surviving disdain, it would be surviving acceptance. The weeks that followed were not measured in grand declarations, but in small collisions of routine and resistance, and each one pressed Serena further into a life that both threatened and steadied her. She learned to fold laundry under Marcus's quiet gaze, to set bowls without asking permission, to mend her patched mesh skirt with thread he provided from a drawer that smelled faintly of lemon oil. While the girls tested her with blunt questions, Nevin demanding she braid her hair straighter, Alira leaving small drawings of rabbits on Serena's chair as silent offerings, and though these gestures were disarming, the world outside the apartment walls made sure to remind her of her place. One morning Nevin returned from school with a folded scrap of paper clenched in her fist. Her jaw set, and when she slammed it on the table, Marcus opened it to reveal neat, deliberate handwriting that read, "Children don't need gutter blood for a mother." Words so sharp Serena felt them slice through the fragile balance she had built. But before she could retreat, Alira's small voice rose, asking, "Does that mean you'll leave?" And Serena knelt, forcing her throat steady, answering, "No, it means some people don't understand. But I'm not leaving." And the girl pressed her head against Serena's shoulder, while Nevin muttered that Dad was bad at braids anyway. A crooked kind of acceptance that stung and soothed at once. Marcus, watching, betrayed no fury, only a tightening of the jaw, his control more dangerous than outburst. And later that night over lamplight, he admitted, "I can protect you from officials, but I can't silence neighbors." And Serena pulled the shawl tighter, whispering, "I've lived with worse than whispers. What I can't bear is being invisible again." To which he replied with unnerving calm, "Then don't be. Stand with me, and we let them see it, no apologies." A pact that felt less like romance and more like strategy, but one she found herself clinging to, because strategy was the only kind of safety she trusted. Yet the pressure sharpened in subtle ways. Chalk marks smeared on their door, stares in the market, colleagues who lingered too long on Marcus's choices, until one afternoon after lecture, a man in a pale coat stopped them, his polite smile concealing disdain as he said, "Marcus, you've brought company," his eyes raking Serena not cruelly, but with surgical assessment. And Marcus, without pause, answered, "This is Serena," offering no apology, no title, no explanation. And in that clipped introduction, she felt the weight of a public defense disguised as simplicity. That night, when the girls slept, she told Marcus fragments of her history, how her Oreni mother refused the trade guilds, how her human father's papers disappeared in a crackdown, how she learned at 14 to barter silence for survival, and Marcus did not recoil or pity, only asked practical questions about places, dates, and skills, treating her past as ledger entries rather than confessions. And the restraint broke something jagged in her chest. Later, when she hung the municipal volunteer seal he gave her on the inside of her shawl, the metal pressing against her ribs, she realized it was both shield and acknowledgement, proof that someone believed her presence could bear weight. And when neighbors left lavender herbs with a warning note, "Watch your company," Marcus pressed the paper under a weight and said only, They'll test us in small ways. We respond with routine, and though his composure unnerved her, Serena felt the truth of his steadiness settling into her bones. Not a rescue, but a pact. A scaffolding of rules and visibility in a city that wanted her erased. And for the first time she wondered if staying was not just survival, but defiance. A defiance she could learn to wield. A turning point arrived with the inevitability of storm clouds gathering, not in a sudden crash, but in the slow, grinding escalation of pressure that finally broke open in public. The neighbors' whispers hardened into complaints carried up the spire. And one evening Marcus returned home with his jaw tighter than usual, handing Serena a folded notice stamped in pale blue. A summons to a community hearing where his fitness as a parent would be reviewed. Veiled language about domestic stability, making clear the target was her. And though Serena's first instinct was to flee before she cost him more, Marcus's calm voice cut through her panic. "They'll expect us to bend. The only way through is to stand," words that rooted in her chest like an anchor. So when the day arrived, she walked beside him and the girls into the hall. The shawl with gold-threaded edge draped across her shoulders, the municipal seal clipped beneath it, Nevin clutching her slate defiantly, and Alira pressing her rabbit against her chest. And the air inside was thick with quiet judgment lecturers. Wardens and neighbors perched in rows, their eyes sliding toward her like blades, while the chairperson recited phrases about propriety and environment for children, questions delivered not to her but to Marcus, testing whether his grief had made him reckless. But when a gray-haired woman finally asked directly, "Why introduce a half-blood drifter into your daughter's home?" the silence that followed pressed hot against Serena's skin, every muscle begging her to shrink. Yet she forced herself upright, her voice steadier than she felt. "Because I am not invisible, and I will not teach their daughters that kindness means silence." And though the words trembled, she added, "I don't ask to replace anyone. I offer to work, to keep the routines, to share costs and care." Her own terms laid bare as if daring them to strike. Marcus's hand touched the table once, not as comfort, but as reinforcement, and his answer followed, cool and deliberate. "She is not hidden, not helper. She is family." And the weight of the word family rang louder than the murmurs that rippled through the hall. One counselor scoffed about precedent, another muttered about instability. But the moment was cut by Nevin, who stood, braid freshly straightened by Serena's hand, and declared with a child's blunt force, "She's our mom," the word falling into the chamber like a stone through glass. And Alira, face red but eyes steady, clutched Serena's hand and echoed softly, "Our mom," and the murmur turned sharp, some with disdain, some with uneasy silence. But Marcus did not flinch, his presence filling the space until even the chairperson shifted uncomfortably and moved to adjourn without a clear verdict, unwilling to ignite open conflict. As they walked out, the corridor bristling with stairs, Serena's knees threatened to buckle, but she kept her chin high, gripping Alira's small fingers, her ears still ringing with the words she thought she would never claim. Not forced on her as mockery, but given freely by children, she had not dared to imagine choosing her. And when Marcus held the door for them, his expression unreadable, but his posture unyielding, she understood that the real hearing had not been inside the hall, it had been here, in the decision of two girls whose voices carried more truth than the weight of a city. And in that moment, though nothing was secure, she realized she had crossed the line from guest to something dangerous and fragile, and real, mother. The night after the hearing, the apartment felt heavier than the spire walls themselves. Yet beneath the weight, there was a current that had shifted, subtle but undeniable, as if the family had survived some great storm together. And in the days that followed, Marcus carried on with his measured routines, while Serena moved through the rooms with a new steadiness in her step, no longer hovering at thresholds, but folding herself into the rhythm of chores and small arguments. Until one morning, as pale light streaked the ocean gray outside, Marcus set a small box on the table with the same calm precision he used to lay out books or bread. And when Serena opened it, she found not ornament, but a thin gold band engraved with a single line across the middle. A mark as plain and unwavering as the man himself. He did not dress it in speeches, only said, "Not because of neighbors. Not because of need, because I want you here. And because the girls have already chosen." And her throat ached at the blunt truth of it. Years of being measured, tolerated, or rejected flashing like static in her hands as she stared at the ring. Until finally she found her voice low but steady. "Then hear my terms honesty. When we are afraid, shared burdens, no hiding. No disappearing." And Marcus nodded once, firm as if sealing a pact. And when she slid the band onto her finger, Illyra gasped, and Nevin's grin split wide as they burst from their room. Elra whispering "Mom," as though testing a sacred word, and Nevin muttering, "Don't tell anyone at school I said it," before hugging her waist. Their laughter filling spaces long kept silent. But outside, the spire had not finished its testing. And that evening, when Marcus returned from lecture, he brushed his thumb over a faint new mark carved on their doorframe, not chalk this time, but the official blue of the wardens, an emblem that usually meant citation or eviction. And Serena's heart lurched until Marcus pressed the folded slip into her hand, and she read not condemnation, but recognition. Her name entered as co-guardian of Nevin and Illyra. Her status shifted from tolerated drifter to acknowledged protector of the household, some bureaucratic ally having filed the paperwork on their behalf. And she stood frozen, the ring pressing against her skin, the girls hovering by her side, as the truth sank in that the city itself could no longer erase her with a whisper. The revelation struck harder than any insult, because for the first time in her life she was written into permanence, a line inked into record. Yet what shook her most was not the seal or the paper, but the sound of the girls later, curled against her on the sofa, while Marcus sat across with sleeves rolled, steady as always, whispering the word mother with careless certainty, as if it had always belonged to her. And Serena, eyes stinging, leaned into the anchor of Marcus's quiet hand at her shoulder and allowed herself to believe that she was no longer a shadow passing through, borrowed shelter, but a woman with a family who had chosen her in full daylight, a mother by pact, by defiance, and by love.